My name is Colleen Blair. I grew up in Ohio with stops in Cleveland and stops in New Orleans, Louisiana. And then for my high school years, I ended up in Chatham, New Jersey. From there, I moved to Washington, D.C. and went to college and lived in D.C. until 1977. And then we moved to Fort Worth in 77. Right now, my connection is passionate advocate. But when I was actually working, I worked at the museum from 1977 to 2016. And I had lots of different positions. I started out as a preschool teacher and ended up as executive vice president of programs. My relationship, that's my relationship with the museum. So I'm retired now and have been. Yes, my background was early childhood education. Oh, I am an avid community volunteer. I volunteer a lot with the botanic research of, the gardens, the Fort Worth Botanic Gardens. I'm a trustee on one of the Brit boards, and I'm a docent at the Japanese Garden. I take courses at TCU, and it's just time passes. It's easy to fill time. There's so much to do in town. So with the Jones excavation, there were a number of them that museum staff participated in. But the Jones excavation, my title at that point was Director of School Services. And my job was to create relationships with K-16 education throughout Texas. And my job also entailed outreach and helping the public understand the engagement of science. I created something called the Lone Star Dinosaur Institute. And the thinking behind that was to bring together a wide berth of Texas leadership educators and give them a firsthand experience with the paleontologists at the dig site. Take them down there and be there. We were there 4 days and just let them see all the facets involved in excavation. We did this for 6 years, and I think the end point was when we received our NSF grant for the exhibition of the Lone Star dinosaurs. So my role at the museum way back when, we didn't have a big advocacy for educators or teachers. We had the IMAX Theater, but we didn't have anyone in the role of connecting with them, inviting them in. So I was really fortunate and been invited to the Association of Science and Technology Centers. Had a leadership institute in the early to mid 90s. And I was invited to participate in that. And I modeled our experiences here, the timing, the sequence, the content, some of the content on the experiences I had at that national level. And we had a number of partnerships at that time. We had really important partnerships with the University of Texas and the Dana Center. We had partnerships with it's called SEDL, S-E-D-L, Southwest Educational Laboratory, and SMU. So my job was to kind of bring all that together and say, can you support the museum's efforts to do this institute? And we were so fortunate. University of Texas Dana Center had all the point contacts. I mean, they knew all the leaders, science leaders in Texas. So they were our advisory team, and they were the ones that we had, I think our first year, we had 50 applicants from across the state. And we could only, our number was determined by how many people can fit in the van. So they actually chose the educators every year. They did that for us. And then CETL, the educational lab, was our funder. And that was extraordinarily good fortune, because our goal was, to give them, the educators came on a Monday, and we put them up in Fort Worth 2 nights, and then they were sleeping at the dig site 3 nights. And they funded all of the resources we gave teachers. They funded the stipends for Lewis and Dale. They were just terrific partners. And then there's SMU as an incredible science partner. Multiple facets to it. And I owe that, Jim Difflin was a really close collaborator with the design of the Institute, because he was the one that knew the processes, and he knew what was involved. So Jim and I just worked really closely to figure out how do you work teachers in 5 days through all of those. So they would arrive Monday afternoon. We would have a dinner at that point we had, oh my golly, it was really a teacher center. It was a research teacher center in the old building. So we would introduce Jim, we would introduce myself, we would tell them what was going to happen to them over the next, 5 days. And then we gave them probably the thing that most educators were the most surprised at, was the wealth of resources that we were able to give them. We gave them a bag, probably with 15 different books about bringing paleontology alive in classrooms, about the science, and just the importance of fossils in just understanding our world. So we did that on a Monday. Then on a Tuesday, we left the museum. We piled into a van, and we made 3 fossil stops. And that helped the teachers understand what are the different geologic zones that are here. We went through different formations, and at each formation they would stop, and Jim would interpret, and they would collect their fossils. And we got to the actual dig site maybe about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And my job was I don't know how to describe it, but we had, just to bring all the food, make sure everybody had everything they needed, because we were feeding at one point 22 to 25 people. So anyway, we had campfires every night. That, I think, just the informal nature of Jim and Lewis and Dale at these campsites at night just helped these teachers relax and realize that these paleontologists loved what they did and cared deeply about teachers and educators. So that really set a tone that first day. Then the next 3 days, they were at the dig, and they were busy excavating right alongside with the scientists. And then every night there was a campfire and lots of discussion, a lot of laughter. The paleontologists are fabulous to work with. I'll stop there. Then on the last day at the dig, we packed up and came back and had a dinner here at the museum. And we invited all of the leadership science staff, or museum staff, the administration staff. So my kind of underlying goal was to really help teachers understand that museums really care. And everyone at the museum, not just somebody with a title like me, everyone supported K-12 and K-16 education. So we had a big dinner for them. Then the last morning, we loaded up in the van again and drove over to SMU, where they met Dale and Jim, and they walked them through the Schuler lab. And we took them to the airport because a lot of them flew in, stopped at the airport, and then brought them home, and those that drove and had their car here left. So it was what, 6 intensive days. Yeah. So the Institute was open to K-12. So our goal was to give them a broad range of resources. And then they were the experts on how to do it in the classroom. We knew the business of science and museums and building relationships, but they knew how to take what they had learned here and experienced here and bring it alive in a classroom. Because what a K1, 2, 3 teacher needs is very different from what that high school teacher will do. I would say the weather. One year it rained, and that really impacts the spirits because it's muddy, and we're sleeping outside, and there's storms around. That was eye opening. But it's challenges, not really. People were so happy to be a part of this and so delighted to have been chosen. And the science team was so open that there never was really challenges there were not operational challenges because it was all thought through, and Jim had done a wonderful job setting up the camp. And by that point, I knew how to run a dinosaur dig. That's really it. It was just the weather was so, first week in June in Texas can be undependable. Yeah. We would bring the teachers back. So they would have the experience in early June. We would bring them back in January or February because anytime you do something that intense with people, it just kind of needs to percolate. So they would come back. And I think the thing that touched me the most that I would say I would just give the museum great kudos for is how the teachers described how the whole experience had touched their teaching career. And it helped them, said, no museum ever treated us. They never invited us in like this. And we have a whole different understanding of the nature of museums. We have a different understanding of how museums work to create public engagement. In the 90s and early 2000s, that was a really big national idea with funders was, because at that point we understood 70-80% of what adults get the science is from television and movies. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to just give them real firsthand experiences with that. I did. I would go to the Texas Science Teachers Convention every year, and when I had that position, and then I would go to the National Science Conference, and I would, as I said, we wanted leadership teachers because they would go back to their districts, and they had a lot of influence with them. So we would run into these people, and years later, they would say, "Colleen, that was one of the highlights of my professional teaching career, was working at that dinosaur dig." How's that make it? It was, to me, we had such a wonderful team. There was such trust. And it was just a wonderful experience to have. And we also, I just can't say enough for the partnership with the University of Texas, with SMU, and with, it was the Department of Education at that point, had these 10 national education centers and they as our funders. I can't say enough about what that support meant to me and the museum. what I think happened is the National Science Foundation finally found a way to abbreviate science, engineering, mathematics, and technology. They had the letters, the abbreviation all mixed up for years. And then they finally came up with the term STEM. So once that became, it really was a buzzword, but we realized that STEM was so critical just in the nature of day-to-day life in America. You needed to understand science. You needed to understand a little bit about engineering and technology. So I think that still is there, maybe much more so probably than, when was I involved with the Institute, 96 to 2002. I think there's a whole lot of emphasis on making sure the nation has scientists, engineers, and is just moving ahead with technology. Yeah, so I think it's probably more important now than it was then. The thing that I learned that was such a surprise, and I learned this from Diffley, was there's a geologic map of Texas. And depending on where you live in Texas, you can find dinosaurs in your backyard. And that's what happened with our first dinosaur dig, is it's a young kid out walking with his dad after a rainstorm. Lo and behold, he finds a dinosaur bone. So I think if you can use the technology to help the public understand, Texas has geologic zones, okay? But then you help them, and I think the concept is you learn how to look. And in geology, you learn how to look at rocks. And I thought it was funny, but it's really serious. If you think you have a bone, a dinosaur bone, what the scientists did is they would pick that bone up or whatever, and they would lick it. And if it stuck to their tongue, it could very well be a bone, because there's a lot of, I guess, calcification that goes on. But I mean, those are little things that are delightful and all of us can participate in. So I think it's a combination of both, of using technology wisely, telling the stories through YouTube or whatever, because Lewis is a great storyteller, telling those stories and then giving them the tools to say, hey, that this can happen to you, because it does happen. I think it goes back to the concept of firsthand learning. And that's one part of my answer. I think having that magnificent specimen here at the museum that's the end game. I went down to Austin when the legislation named Paluxysaurus jonesii the state dinosaur. That was an incredible honor. And to be with a museum, it really raised the awareness of the importance of museums in American society. And I was just so proud that the find here could be elevated to become the state dinosaur. So I think all of those pieces, from the research that happened at Schuler to the articulation, I mean, that's its own amazing story. And then the relationships with the universities, and then how the museum had the resources to touch the lives of the public. Because the public, it's hard, and the public's not going to get into the fossil lab at Schuler, but they surely can come here. And the beauty of dinosaurs is every year there's a whole new crop of 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And there's very little in the imagination or in kids' lives that sparks imagination like dinosaurs. It's incredible. And children are always wondrous about it. And that was one of the things that was so wonderful about working here is we were not only became dedicated to educators in Texas, but we were founded on the belief of children. So for me, it just melded all of this so beautifully. And I think we have a legacy as an institution, as a museum, to think about what's our role? What is our role? And that is something we do so well, so well. Oh, it's a love story. My husband and I were living in DC. He was in law school. And every weekend I would drive my car in and just wander the halls of the Smithsonian. And it was the first time in my life, very first time, that I had the experience of being in charge of my own learning. I could turn right in the hall or I could turn left. I could go to the portrait gallery or the National History Gallery. And it was a big aha moment for me. And I thought, because at that point I was teaching first grade, I decided I don't want to do that anymore. I want to work in a museum. So when we were transferred here from DC, and someone in DC had told me about the museum, and I had a preschool background, and they said, you might check that place out. So the first week I lived here, I came and I knocked on, there was the education director at that point was named Polly Renfro. And I said, I just want to be here. I just want to be here. And I did get a position. And, I got over time, I was able to speak nationally, different conferences. And I always said, the air in museums is different. It's an oxygen that just fuels your imagination and your creativity. Because there's nowhere you can't go in a museum. There's, they take you all sorts of places. And I think that's really important in lifespans from preschoolers through people my age. I learned so much about the nature of science just by working here. And as I've aged, it's helped me connect dots. What does this relationship have to do with this? And I think working in a museum, and to this day, I still have a membership card to the American Association of Museums. I'm a museum nerd, everywhere I go, that's what I do. I just hope that museums can stay at the forefront, that museums continue to engage their public, and that their funding streams are multiple. There's people that love them as donors, and universities that care about them. So I'm really hopeful. I have a personal one. Okay. I had never slept outside before. I was a city kid. So Diffley says to me, Colleen, we sleep outside. And I went, oh, okay. So I find a sleeping bag from a friend. And he gives me this mosquito net to put over me. And we're we're on a ranch in the middle of, Toller, Texas. I forget the name of the little town. But I didn't, and so there were cows on this ranch and big pecan trees. And I didn't know what cows do at night. I thought, am I going to be okay? And eventually what I did, I slept outside for a few years. And then I bought a station wagon and I slept in the back. That was something I was never wildly comfortable with, was sleeping outside. That's just a personal thing. I think my favorite holistic memory was around those campfires, watching those educators laugh and have such a repartee with the paleontologists involved. That was amazing because there's so much said about educating children. But when you have an educator that loves what they do and feels that they're a master of the conceptual knowledge, it just creates a magic environment in the classroom. Or a lot of those teachers were involved in the actual professional development for their school district. So that was also incredibly special, is knowing how one person could impact, a town like Leander, Texas, or a town like we had one woman from Van Horn, Texas. It's just terrific. So those are my holistic memories. And then the sleeping outside, I still don't do that many years later. Never in a world did I imagine that I would be going to a dinosaur dig site, that I would be, my job would be to invite people in and experience it on their own. It was, I think it's that it's like when I'm 22 years old and I see the Smithsonian. It's like, well, that's magic. And to be able to have that in my memory, and I tell my grandkids, it's really special. Again, the role of museums in America, in Texas, nationally, and I'm sure globally, is what a special job they have and what a wonderful opportunity. The ratio of museum studies graduates to available jobs, it's rough. I would say, from the time you're a kid, teen, they hire summer staff. So get at it early, because it's, I've seen a lot of research papers about, so how old are people when they get engaged with museums? A lot of it happens when kids are little, impressionable, elementary, middle school, high school. Get at it early, volunteer. What I've seen here is a number of people who came to volunteer were actually hired. Network, call people. Look at the staff directory. I mean, I can't tell you just how many random calls I would get from people who would say, I want to work at a museum. Another thing I would, if you have the resources to make it happen, I would go to the conferences. Texas Association Museum, go early and listen. Just be a listener. And then when you get good at listening, be a networker. And don't stop. Don't stop trying. Let them know how much it means. So that would be my advice. Pie in the sky, probably. But it takes diligence. Mm-hmm. I was lucky because I came in just through the preschool door, and over time, just my job changed. But and take any job you get. That would be another thing. It may not be the one you want, but it'll get you in the door. I mean, there's so many, they're really not here anymore. But I know over my 40 years here, I met so many young people, and that was their story. That was their story, and they made it come true. And some people are fortunate enough to get to go to graduate school and do the museum studies route. But a lot of people aren't. And there's still room, for history degrees, science degrees, education, early education degrees. One thing I would say is my science background. In college, I had required biology and required astronomy. I did not have I just didn't have a science background. And I would say, don't let that deter you, because another thing that's so critical is I was fortunate when I was working here. There were such close and supportive relationships among the staff that the people that were charged with the science included all of us, from all sorts of, heck, I was a preschool teacher, and they created all sorts of opportunities for us to experience it firsthand. So I would say there's a lot of entry points to museums, lots and lots. So I've been out of the business now at 9 years. And it was just, for me, majority. I mean, until the very, very last year, I couldn't have had a better job in the world and got to do so many things and meet so many people. And the 60 or 70 Texas educators that we influenced, that's a point of pride for me that, they got to see this firsthand. And that's very special because they taught, or they impacted. You say each teacher in a lifetime, a career, maybe can touch anywhere from 1,200 kids to if they're in high school or college, 3,000. That's a lot of impact. So I hold on to that. That was a mighty powerful crew of people. Yeah, and I owe all of that to the Dana Center. And they knew who the leadership educators were. And by golly, they were here.